bottom of Daf Yud Zayin Omid Beis. Is it Tashma? Is that what you're up to?
Yes.
Okay, so we have this machlokus between Rav and Shmuel, as when you have not kosher schach, pasul schach in the middle of a sukkah, is the width of psul 4 tfachim, which is what we've really said all along, or is it 4 amos, which is what Rav had suggested, just like if it's at the side of a sukkah by the wall. So Tashma Sichacha b'Nisarim Shel Eretz sheyesh bohen dalid divrei hakol pisula. Well, we saw this brisa before. It says that if you use schach and you have planks that are 4 tfachim wide, then both Reb Yehuda and Reb Meir, who have a machlokus about the usage of planks because of the rabbinical concern that it looks like a regular ceiling, they both agree that it is pasul. So Rabbi Meir posa, but if it's ein bahen daled, but if there is less than, if the width of the planks is less than 4 tfachim, so then Rabbi Meir posel v'Rabbi Yehuda machshir. So then Rabbi Meir says it's pasul, Rabbi Yehuda says it's kosher. Umoda Rabbi Meir, but Rabbi Meir does agree. She'im yesh bein neser leneser kimelo neser, that even in the case where Rabbi Meir says it's pasul, both when it's less than 4 tfachim and when it's wider than 4 tfachim, in both of those situations, that he agrees that if you position the boards in such a way that you have airspace between the boards that is equivalent to the width of the boards, sheminiach pesel b'neim ukeshera, that you could put kosher schach in the airspace between the boards, and that'll make the sukkah kosher, because now you have the shade primarily coming, or at least more than 50% coming from the kosher schach. So bishlam lamanda amar bein be'emtza bein minat saad bedalad amos mishum hachi keshera. So I could understand why that if you say that the minimum width of, or that the maximum width is 4 amos for pasul schach in the center of the sukkah, then I could understand why a board of 4 tfachim is still going to be kosher, according to everybody, as long as there's schach in between the boards. But if you're going to tell me that a board of 4 tfachim wide is pasul in the middle of a sukkah because it's not kosher schach, so then why is this a kosher sukkah? You've got something running through the sukkah that pasuls the sukkah. So Amar Rav Huna Bereda Rav Yoshua Hacha besukkah de lohavya ela shmona amos mitzum tzamos askinan. So what we're talking about over here is where we have, again, our planks are 4 tfachim wide. We're dealing with a sukkah that is exactly 8 amos across, which then turns out to be 24 tfachim. So 28, sorry. So 28 tfachim across, because each tefach is 48. 48 tfachim. 6 times 8 is 48. So 6 tfachim per ama. 6 times 8 is 48. So you have 48 tfachim. So v'yahiv neser upesel v'neser v'pesel mehai gisa. So the way it's going to work is that you have you're going to have
24. You're
going to have plank and schach, plank and schach, plank and schach, starting from one end. So you've got your dofen akuma starting, and then you've got schach, and then you continue with a plank, and then schach, etc., etc. V'neser upesel, v'neser upesel, v'neser upesel mehai gisa. Dahavelu shnei psalim be'emtza, v'ike hechsher sukkah be'emtza. So basically, the way it works is that even though leading up to the middle section, which ends up to be two sets of 4 tfachim wide of schach, in other words, because you start at both ends. You start with a plank and then schach. Plank, schach, plank, schach, plank, and then 2 schachs in the middle.
8 tfachim.
So 8 tfachim of schach in the middle. And we know that the minimal measurement of a sukkah is 7 by 7 tfachim. So in the center, just in that place of 8 tfachim, you're going to have a kosher sukkah. That's what the Gemara is suggesting over here. Regarding the walls, etc., that's a little bit of an issue. You'd have to say that you have to apply the principle of dofen akuma, because since it's less than 4 tfachim on either side of non-kosher schach, you can apply the principle of dofen akuma, right? Up until the two middle 8 tfachim of schach, the middle 8 tfachim of schach.
It could be many more, right?
Well, it has to be only up to 4 amos, because you can only apply the principle of dofen akuma for 4 amos.
On each side.
So on each side. So therefore, you have the dofen akuma principle, which only works up to 4 amos. You've got an 8 amma width. You've got 8 tfachim in the center. So you've got a kosher sukkah.
Do you have to sit under the middle? Or
You'd have to sit under the middle, like we learned before. You can't sit under the dofen akuma. Okay, so that's the way the Gemara answers it. If you hold that a 4 tefach plank or a 4 amma plank is going to be possible. Okay. Anyway. Now we go on. No. This forget about the machlokas Rabbi Yehuda and Reb Meir. This is between Rav and Shmuel. Machlokas Rav and Shmuel is whether the minimal measurement of a kosher schach or the maximal measurement of kosher schach is 4 tfachim or 4 amos. Okay, let's go on. Now we go to another topic, which is a machlokas between Abaye and Rava. Amar Abaye, Avir Shlosha Besukkah Gedola, Umiyato Bein Bakanim Bein Beshpudim Havimiut. So Abaye states as follows. We know that even though there's this machlokas about non-kosher schach, whether it's 4 tfachim that makes it invalid or 4 amos which makes it invalid, one thing that we know is airspace. If you've got no space and you've got an aperture of 3 tfachim wide, that automatically passes the sukkah. 3 tfachim of airspace in the middle of a sukkah demolishes the sukkah. So, but Abaye tells us a very important chiddush. Let's say you want to minimize that airspace. He says, if you put in kosher bamboo sticks, that's one way of fixing it, but you could also fix it by putting in rebar. You could put in iron sticks in there as well, which is pasal schach, and still have a kosher sukkah. Because according to everyone, as long as there's less than 4 tfachim width of non-kosher schach, it's still kosher. Here you've got only 3 tfachim width of non-kosher schach. So you've remedied the problem of airspace, right? So havimiyot, but besukkah ketana bekanem havimiyot bishpudim lo havimiyot. That only works when you're dealing with a very spacious sukkah. Let's say you've got a sukkah that's only 7 tfachim long, and running through the middle of it is an aperture of 3 tfachim. Then you have obviously you can't fix it with non-kosher schach, because then you don't have 7 tfachim of schach. Okay, so v'hani mili min hatzad. But that's only true now that we've talked. This is only when you have an aperture of airspace that's on the side, meaning it's adjacent to the wall. I had explained it in the center, but really the Gemara says this is where it's adjacent to the wall. You've got an airspace. Here's your wall. You've got your schach covering, and over here you've got air. Okay, so that's where we say that you can fill it in. And also the Gemara says, when you've got an aperture of less than 3 tfachim of airspace, we say love it. We say that if it's less than 3 tfachim, it's as if it's connected. However, what if you've got airspace in the center? Can you say love it if there's less than 3 tfachim? So the Gemara says that's a machlokas. Pligi bo Rav Acha v'Ravina, chad omer yesh lavud be'emtza, v'chad omer ein lavud be'emtza. This is a machlokas. One Manda Amar says, just like we say lavud when it's against a wall, so too we say lavud when it's in the middle of the ceiling. And the other Manda Amar says, no, we only apply the principle of lavud, that we can say that as long as it's less than 3 tvachim wide, it's as if it's completely enclosed, is only if it's on the side of the wall. What's the difference conceptually? When you're up against the wall, you're dealing with solid mass. So it's easier to say that the airspace is insignificant because you got a wall, you got solid wall over there. But if you've got just horizontal ceiling and you've got an aperture here, conceptually it's a little bit harder to say that the two of them are connected because you don't have solid mass running vertically at all. That's the argument.
The one that says it is love, is it connected to the rest of the schach, and or is it the wall? Like where does it? What's connected to?
It seems like it's connected to the schach. In other words, it would seem that you're allowed to sit even under the air. It would seem that way because it's like it's as if it's not even dofen akum. It's as if it's mamish connected. It's mamish connected. Okay. So anyway, the Gemara now asks, "My time at the Manda Amar yesh lavud be'emtza." What's the proof text of the Manda Amar who says we say lavud both on the side and in the middle? He says because Titania Korah hayotza mikosel zeh ve'enu nagas bekosel acher. Now let's deal with the laws of Eruvin. you want to make an Eruv in your Mavoi to allow people to carry in the Mavoi. Okay, so we learned about this before. You have to put either a Lechi or a Korah. Lechi is the vertical post on one side of the doorway to the Mavoi, or you put a Korah, which is a cross beam, a cross stick, whatever it is, over the top of the entrance, just as a demarcation that you're entering into a different domain. So here, the Bryce is dealing with the following case. You've got a beam that runs across your doorway, but it doesn't run all the length of the width of the doorway. It's a little bit shorter than the width of the doorway. So the following two permutations. It's Yotza Mikosel Zeh Ve'enu Yot Nogas B'Kosel Acher. One is where it's connected to one side of the doorway, and it just misses the other doorway. It's just a little bit shorter. But the other case is V'chein Shtei Koros Echas Yotza Mikosel Zeh Ve'echas Yotza Mikosel Acher Ve'enu Nogos Zu B'Zu. The other one is where you got two small little beams coming out, one from this side, one from that side, and they just miss each other. They're just a little bit too short, and there's a little bit of a gap
in the middle.
There's a gap in the middle. So in both of those cases, Pachos Mishlosha Eino Tzarech Lahavi Korah Acheres. Shlosha Tzarech Lahavi Korah Acheres. He says, as long as there's less than three tefachim of gap, in both of those cases, either where it's one long beam and it just misses the misses the other side of the door, or when it's two beams and there's a gap between the two, in both of those cases we apply the principle of lavud. So you see here, according to that mandomer who says that you do apply lavud in both cases, regardless of whether it's lavud on the side or lavud in the center, you apply the principle of lavud. And v'idach, and the other mandomer who says you can't bring a raya from there, he says shiny koros derabanan. He says that's rabbinic law. Because midioraisa, biblically, of course you're allowed to carry an amavi without a korah and without a lechi. So the rabbis are lenient that you can say lavud even in the center. But with sukkah, which is a din dioraisa, we only allow to be liberal with lechi when it's on by the wall. But if it's in the center, so then you can't.
We had the DAF a couple days ago in terms of comparing Shabbos and Redwood Arab, and we already said the same thing, right? The question of Raisa versus.
Correct, exactly, right. So now the Gemara says, "My time of demand Amar ein lavud be'emtza." Now, what's the proof text of the mandomer who says that you don't apply the laws of lavud if it's in the center of the ceiling? Ditnan, he's going to bring his proof from the laws of Tumah. The Mishnah says by the laws of Tumah, which is a Mishnah in Ohalos, it says Aruba shababayis subaposeach tefach. So now you know the law of Ohel, which is that if there's a corpse in the house, then every person and every kli in the house becomes tameh, right? But let's say you have an aperture, let's call it a skylight, an open skylight that's in the center of the ceiling, okay? It's as long as it's 1 tefach by 1 tefach, that's the first case. Tumah b'bayis kulo tameh. If the source of tumah is in the house somewhere, then everything that's in the house becomes tameh. But masha keneged aruba tohar, except for, let's say you've got a jug that's directly underneath the skylight, that's not considered to be under the coverage of the ohel, and therefore it does not become tameh. Tuma keneged aruba kol habayis kulo tohar. If the tuma is directly underneath the skylight, then still everything in the house is going to be tohar. In that case, because the corpse or the corpse flesh, whatever it is not considered to be part of the ohel because it's directly underneath that aperture, so there's no ohel over the corpse flesh. Ein baruba poseach tefach, and then it goes even further, and it tells us that the halacha is the same even if the aperture is smaller than a tefach. It says tuma bebayis keneged aruba tohar. If there's a corpse or corpse flesh anywhere in the house, then anything that's in the house is tameh, except for things that are directly underneath the skylight. Tuma keneged aruba kol habayis kulo tohar. And if the corpse flesh is directly underneath the skylight, even if it's less than 1 tefach by 1 tefach, then everything in the house is tohar. The question, of course, that Rashi asks is, this Mishnah seems to be distinguishing between when the skylight is 1 tefach by 1 tefach versus when it's less than 1 tefach by 1 tefach, but the halachas are the same. In both cases, if the tumah is directly underneath the skylight, everything is tahor, and if it's not directly underneath the skylight, then only those kalim that are underneath the skylight are tahor. So what's the difference? Answers Rashi, there are differences. Not vis-a-vis this halacha, but there are other differences that are germane to the laws of Tumah in Maseches Ohalos, and that's why the Mishnah divided the two. But for the purposes of our discussion, there is no difference. But what are we bringing from here? What's the shear of lavud? 3 tfachim. What do you see from here? An aperture that's 1 by 1, much less than the shear of lavud, is still considered an aperture. So it's not, you don't view this one square, this one little 1 tefach by 1 tefach square as if it's completely sealed to create an ohel. So you see that you don't apply lavud when it's in the center of the ceiling. So the Gemara says, so what is the other mandomer going to do with that? The laws of Tumah have a completely different Mosaic tradition. You can't compare the standard laws of lavud to the laws of Tumah lavud, because the laws of Tumah are unique. And there's a halacha l'Moshe Misinai specifically regarding the laws of Tumah that do not allow me to apply lavud. Fine. Darash Rabbi Yehuda bar Ilai. So now we have 2 stories about Rabbi Yehuda bar Ilai expounding on a halacha, and Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yossi saying, please clarify your words. And you'll see now, that's the reason why we bring these 2 stories in. So the first case has to do with sukkah, okay? A house where the ceiling caves in. So now you got this big gaping hole in the ceiling. You want to put SUKKAH on it and have a kosher sukkah. Rabbi Yehuda bar Ilai says that's fine. So Amar lefan of Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Parish. So he said, Rabbi, please, you need to clarify your words, because Kach Piresh Abba, my father, Rabbi Yossi, had qualified that statement, and he said, Arba Amos Pasula, Pachos mi Arba Amos Keshera. This goes back to our mission about the principle of Dof and Akuma. The only time that the schach over that hole in the ceiling is kosher is when the remaining portions of ceiling that are adjacent to the walls are less than Arba Amos. But if they're more than Arba Amos, then the sukkah will not be kosher. You have to clarify that. So then we have another case. Darash Rabbi Yehuda bar Ilai, Avruma Sharia. And he said like this. Another case, Rabbi Yehuda bar Ilai said a halachic statement where he says there's a small fish called the Avruma, or the Abruma. And it's like an anchovy or a sardine or a herring, something like that. Right? So he said it's kosher. Now, of course, why wouldn't it be kosher? It's got fins and scales. Why wouldn't it be kosher? The answer is, what? Because of worms. You know, fish sometimes are infested with worms depending upon what bodies of water they frequent. If the water has a high worm content, so then you can't just automatically assume that the fish is kosher. There was this shaila a couple years ago where there were people selling fish, fresh fish, and there was a certain fish, I forget which fish it was. Was it salmon?
It might be herring.
No, herring is kodesh kadoshim. You don't touch herring.
The onions kill it all.
Right? That's right. The onions. Yeah, in the water. The onions in the water. Take it.
Exactly.
Right. But there were many poskim who had expressed a concern about the worm issue, and then it was a big controversy. But anyway, the point is that you see from this Gemara that sometimes worms are an issue. So, but he said, but don't worry, because this avruma fish does not have, you can assume that it doesn't have worms, and it's permitted. So, Amar lefan of Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Parish. He says, Rabbi, please, you have to clarify, because it's not always true. Kach Amar Abba shel makom ploni asur shel makom ploni muteres. He says it depends where they come from. So, the abruma fish from one body of water is fine, but there's another abruma that comes from another body of water that is infested. Kihada Amar Abaye. We have a similar statement that Abaye said, Hay tzachanta de bab nahara sharia, that there's a tzachanta fish, also a small fish, that if it comes from the river Bab, then it's permitted. My taima, ilema mishum de redifi maya, so why does the river Bab not have infestations? One argument says the Gemara, maybe because it's got a strong current, it's got rapids. And v'hai dag tame keven de lesli chutashedra lamatzi koim. And maybe you'll argue it's because any invertebrate sea creature cannot survive in that strong current, and therefore they won't infest the fish. The Gemara says, no, wait a minute. One second. Well, the Gemara says, wait a minute. The haka chazinan dekoi. But we see that worms do inhabit strong rapids. So then the Gemara says, Ela mishum de malichi maya. So maybe the other alternative is because it's got a high saline content in that body of water, and worms can't survive there. And any sea creature that doesn't have scales cannot survive in a high saline, very salty water. But that also can't be, because we see that there are worms in very, very salty waters. So Ela mishum delo marbe tinaihu dag tame. So the answer is, says the Gemara, is because the riverbed, the earth, does not have the right ingredients to produce these worms. Now Rashi seems to be saying that the Gemara is talking about spontaneous generation of worms from soil, which was the medieval and ancient world belief. I don't know whether you necessarily have to learn that way. The point is that the Gemara says there are certain maybe alkaline levels or something like that need to be present in the soil of the river in order for worms to be able to survive in that kind of body of water. And this river Bab does not have that quality of soil, and that's why the fish are not infested in the river Bab. What did you want to say?
I just wanted to indicate the article seems to interpret it as other non-kosher fish amongst them, as opposed to insects as the problem.
Yeah, but the point is that it's an invertebrate sea creature, so the simple understanding is that it's worms, because generally speaking, worms infest fish flesh. Okay?
I thought they meant you gather the kosher fish with the non-kosher fish and
that's
them together.
That's what
worms.
Right. That's what. That's what I. That's. I guess that's. I guess you could. You could learn you could learn it that way. But I was understanding it that it's a continuation of the previous discussion, that the abruma fish.
Even the article says
from the start they start with
right from the beginning. They said the abruma fish are so small. You have other fish that are so small. It's hard to tell the difference.
Yeah, they never mention.
All right. So so I was learning. I'm learning it about the worms. But anyway, okay. But I accept that interpretation. You can learn either way. Okay, Amar Ravina v'ha'idin d'shachli nahar esan v'nahar gam d'lahasa masira. But nowadays that you have different, the motions of the waters, the currents have shifted over the course of decades and centuries, and now you've got these two other tributaries that flow into the river Bab, which do have those sea creatures. Then you do have to worry about the fish being infested by worms, or, according to the other interpretation that you've suggested, there are other fish that are like it, that are invertebrates and are not kosher. Fine. Itmar. So this obviously had nothing to do with sukkah, but it had to do with the fact that Rabbi Yoshia had made a statement, and Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yossi had to say, please clarify your words. Rabbi Yehuda Bar Eloi, sorry. So Itmar. Let's go weiter. So let's go back to our Mishnah. Our Mishnah had talked about a case where you've got an entire courtyard where the entire internal periphery of the courtyard is bounded by a covered patio or covered porch. I'll call it a patio, okay? So it's got a cover, like corrugated plastic. Okay, let's just imagine that corrugated plastic going all the way around the periphery of the chutzner on the inside. And we said that if you put SUKKAH over it, will that be a kosher sukkah? It depends. If the corrugated plastic is less than 4 amos, you apply the principle of dofen akum, and it's a kosher sukkah. If it's more than dalet amos, then it's going to be pasul. Now, let's take a look at a machlokas amoraim that's similar. If you have this corrugated plastic all around your chutzner, and it doesn't have pitzimin, so first of all, we'll talk about a case where it has pitzimin. Now, what are pitzimin? Pitzimin are posts. As long as it has posts going onto abutting the inside of the chutzner, which is open air, and as long as those posts are within 3 tfachim of each other, then the posts themselves form the walls. And so therefore you have a kosher sukkah from the edge of the plastic covers inwards, because you've got those posts which serve as walls for the inside of the chutzner. And by the way, people make sukkahs like this, and I was just in Miami. They tell me that no one makes sukkahs out of the walls out of solid material. It gets too hot. So they have lattice, or they have other mesh, for their walls, because that way the air can circulate. Otherwise, it's just the heat is too unbearable. Halavai, we should have such problems. Anyway, so then it's kosher. But she'ein la pitzimin, But if it doesn't have those posts in the front, right, where you want your sukkah to start, so Abaya Omar Kesher, Rava Omar Pesula. Abaya says it's kosher, even if the corrugated plastic is more than 4 amos. Now think about that for a second. He seems to be contradicting the Mishnah. We'll have to get to that in a moment. The Rava Omar Pesula. But Rava says it's possible. Abaya Omar Kesher. Why does Abaya say it's kosher? Because Amrinan Pi Tikra Yored V'Sosei. Because we say as follows. We say that the edge of the cover of the roof of that patio is considered to act as an invisible wall. Now what he means is as follows. Here's your chutzner wall. Here's your corrugated plastic. But we'll say that it's a little bit thick like this. It's maybe a wood or something, some other material. This width, which is let's say a half an inch or an inch, goes down vertically. So you say the principle of good achis, which our old friend, right? Which you can imagine, since the wall starts here, you draw an imaginary line, goes all the way down. And Abaya says, you create an imaginary wall, and therefore it goes down to the ground, even without posts, and that's what creates your wall. It's the edge over here, which is vertical, which goes all the way down to the floor. So Rava Amar Pesula Lo Amrinan Pitikra Yored V'Sosei. And Rava says, I disagree. We don't say that to make a wall of a sukkah. So Amar Le Rava Le Abaya Le Didach De Amart Pitikra Yored V'Sosei Afilu Hivchis Dofen Emtsoi. So he says to him like this. Can I have another sefer, Shlomi, please?
You need a certain minimum thickness.
No, so that's not going to be discussed today. It's not going to be discussed. Not part of our. Can you pass me that Gemara, please? Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Okay. So he says to him like this. He says, according to your argument, if you've got a sukkah, which normally has to be 3 walls, and so normally there would be a 3rd wall over here in the back. But let's say you took away that 3rd wall, and instead you put a plank on top over here. Yeah, thanks. You put a plank on the top over here, and you put the rest with kosher SUKKAH. According to you, Abaya, this should be a kosher sukkah because you've got the edge over here which goes down vertically. Say Pitikra Yord V'Sosei and create an imaginary wall on the back of the sukkah, and that should be kosher. So he says. So Abaya says to him, Amarle Modino Lach Behahi Dahavale Kemovoy Hamafulash. Abaya says, I agree with you that in this case, structurally this is not a good sukkah because it is so open, because it's open all the way from one end of the sukkah to the other, that there's only so far that you can go with this idea of Pitikra Yord V'Sosei. Since it's like Grand Central Station running through this sukkah, it's not a realistic sukkah. It's not a realistic enclosure. So I agree with you in that case. Okay, let us go on. So Lema Abaya v'Rava beplukta d'Ravu Shmuel kamiflagi. Let us suggest that this machlokus of Abaya and Rava is the same machlokus of Rav and Shmuel, who have an argument by Hilchas Shabbos on this very issue. De itmar achsadra bebika. You have a patio. You have an enclosed porch out in the middle of nowhere. So basically you have a roof with 4 posts, supported by 4 posts. No walls, just a roof supported by 4 posts. So here's the machlokus. Rav Amar muter l'taltel b'kulo, the Amrinan Pitikra Yored V'Sosei. Ushmol Amar ein metaltelin ba, ela b'dalet amos the lo Amrinan Pitikra Yored V'Sosei. So here's the machlokus. Rav says that you're allowed to carry underneath this covered roof because you look at the edges of the roof and they're all vertical. So you say you have imaginary walls on all 4 sides. And therefore it's an enclosed Rishus HaYachid, and you can carry as much as you want underneath this rooftop on Shabbos. And Shmuel says, no, you can only carry less than Dalet Amos. Why? Because we don't say Pitikra Yord V'Sosei, we don't say this good achis and create imaginary walls. So the Gemara now says, it seems like this is the exact same machlokes as Abai and Rava. Mm-hmm. Do we say that you can create that imaginary wall or not? So this is ingenious of the Gemara. Think conceptually of the difference between the creation of the imaginary wall by the Achsadra case and the creation of the imaginary wall when you're in the Achsadra case for Shabbos. What's the conceptual difference? From a logistics point of view, what is the conceptual difference? And then you'll see it's a brilliant distinction. It's a brilliant distinction that the Gemara is now about to make. All right, but you'll
no edge in the front of it.
What?
And the Excedrin is only on the sides; it's not on all four sides.
That would be one argument. That's not that's a good argument. That's not the one that the Gemara makes over here. But there's another distinction. In the case of the achsadra out in the middle of nowhere, where you want to carry, the walls are creating an enclosure for the purposes of utility underneath the ceiling. So you're creating the walls to allow you to use the space underneath and within the walls, underneath the roof, the ceiling that creates the walls. In the case of sukkah, you want to create a wall so that you can use the area outside the achsadra. So maybe that would be a significant difference as to when you say pitikra yored v'sose. So the Gemara argues like this. So the Gemara says aliba d'shmuel kuli alma lo pligi. So the Gemara says, now the truth is, according to Shmuel, you'd have to agree. You'd have to agree. Abaye would have to submit that according to Shmuel, he definitely holds that you don't say pitikra yored v'sosin. If he holds that you can't carry underneath the achsadra in the Hilchas Shabbos, he will certainly agree that you can't use the imaginary wall to create a sukkah in the Chatzar case. However, and therefore Abaye will have to submit that my kula is not according to Shmuel, I only go according to Rav. But ki pligi aliba de Rav. But Abaye and Rava will tell you that I could still hold like, I can either hold like Shmuel or I could hold like Rav too, because Abaye Karav, Abaye will tell you, well, I hold like Rav. Just like Rav says, you create imaginary walls to let you carry underneath the achsadra on Shabbos, you create imaginary walls to allow you to have the wall of a sukkah to make in the Chatzar. But V'Rava Omer Lecha, Rava will tell you no. Ad kan Omer Rav Hasam ela de mechitzas la'achsadra hu di'avidi. Aval hacha de lav lahachi avidi lo. That in the case of the achsadra in Hilchas Shabbos, the purpose of the imaginary walls is to allow you to have utility underneath the ceiling that created the imaginary walls. And that's when Rav says it's okay. But Rav will agree that to create an imaginary wall using this ceiling to let you have a wall that the utility of which will allow you to have a halachic system beyond that wall, not under the achsadra, that Rav would not agree to. So the Gemara now says Tanan. Now let's take a look at our Mishnah. Just go into another couple lines. How in the world could Abaye argue with the Mishnah? The Mishnah seems to say that if the achsadra length is more than Dalet Amos, you can't build a sukkah there. And according to Abaye, you should be allowed to because of pitikra yored v'sosin. Use the imaginary wall. So the Gemara says Tanan v'chein chatzar hamukefes achsadra, that if a chatzar is bounded along its periphery by this achsadra, you can't, if it's longer, if the corrugated plastic is longer than 4 amos, you can't use it. Va'amai, but why not? Name a pitikra yored v'sosin. A wall's a wall. So Tirgam Arava Liba de Abaye Shehishva es Kiruyav. The answer is like this. When you want to create your okay, so you've got over here, you've got your achsadra again, right? So you want to create your imaginary wall. So when you want to make your SUKKAH, we'll call this our SUKKAH, okay? When you want to put your SUKKAH up here, that's where Abaye says you could use this vertical width as your imaginary wall. Perfect, great. You know what our Mishnah is talking about? Where you insert the SUKKAH here. By inserting the SUKKAH here, you're obfuscating, you're obliterating the edge here. You're obliterating the edge, and you're not allowing it to be an imaginary wall because you're putting it flush up against this surface, and therefore you've completely eliminated the opportunity for this to act as your imaginary wall. It can only act as your imaginary wall if the SUKKAH is above it. But if the SUKKAH is flush with it, it won't work. And that, Abaye says, is what our Mishnah is talking about. Have a wonderful day.